A man walks into traffic at exactly the wrong moment. His phone was in his hand. Witnesses say he seemed distracted. The driver who hit him will never be charged. Because how do you prosecute an accident? There's something most people never think about when they hear the word espionage. They picture gun battles, high-speed chases, arrests in the middle of the night. But those are failures. Real intelligence work ends quietly. It ends in ways that no one questions. A heart attack at 52, a car that veers off a mountain road, a laptop stolen during a vacation, a career that collapses for reasons no one can quite explain. These are not dramatic. They are not cinematic. And that is exactly why they work. The psychology behind this is older than intelligence agencies themselves. If you want someone gone, removed, discredited, or silenced, you have the choices. You can make it loud, public, and obvious, or you can make it look like the world did it on its own. One creates martyrs. The other creates nothing. No protests, no investigations, no international incidents. Just a tragedy that people accept because tragedies happen every day. And when something looks like an accident, people do not ask who benefited. They ask what went wrong. This is the invisible architecture of covert operations between ISI and RAW, not the things you read about in declassified files 20 years later, the things that never make it into any file at all. Because if an operation is executed correctly, there is no operation to report. There is only an event, a terrible, unfortunate, unforeseeable event. The kind of thing that makes people say, "That's awful," and then move on with their lives. Consider how these outcomes are designed. When an intelligence service wants to neutralize a target, the question is never just how. The question is how to do it in a way that closes the case before it opens. Arresting someone creates a trial. Trials create attention. Attention creates scrutiny. Scrutiny creates risk. But an accident creates closure. The police file a report. The family grieves. And the story ends there. No one digs deeper into a man who died because his brakes failed. No one wonders if the food poisoning that killed a journalist 2 weeks before his expose was more than bad luck. Accidents are emotionally acceptable. They fit into the way people already see the world. This is the concept intelligence professionals call plausible deniability. But that term makes it sound bureaucratic, legal, distant. What it really means is this: make the truth so blurry that no one can see it clearly enough to act on it. Let the facts exist. Let people wonder. Let conspiracy theories swirl. Because as long as nothing can be proven, nothing can be done. And the beauty of accidents is that they come preloaded with explanations. Human error, bad timing, unfortunate circumstances. These are narratives people want to believe, because the alternative is too unsettling to accept. Now think about the operations you never hear about, not the ones that go wrong and leak into the press, the ones that succeed so perfectly they vanish into the background noise of daily life. A scientist who was working on sensitive research suffers a sudden stroke. A whistleblower's credibility collapses after financial irregularities are discovered in his accounts. A defector who was about to talk decides, inexplicably, to go back. These are not always accidents in the literal sense, but they are accidents in the way they are perceived, and perception is the only reality that matters. The reason ISI and RAW invest so heavily in these invisible outcomes is simple. Silence is more powerful than proof. If someone disappears and everyone knows you did it, you gain fear, but lose legitimacy. If someone disappears and no one can say for certain what happened, you gain both. Fear lives in the uncertainty. Control lives in the deniability. And both agencies understand that the most effective operations are the ones where even the target's own family believes it was just bad luck. What makes this more disturbing is the realization that you have already accepted dozens of these outcomes without question. You have read about deaths, disappearances, career destructions, and strange coincidences. And you moved on because the explanation made sense. Someone was careless, someone was unlucky, someone made a mistake. But how many of those mistakes were engineered? How many coincidences were carefully timed? How many accidents were rehearsed? Because if an intelligence service is doing its job correctly, you will never know the difference. You will never see the hand that moved the piece. You will only see the board after the move is over. And by then, it will look like nothing happened at all. The reason most intelligence operations succeed is not because they are invisible. It is because they are forgettable. There is a difference. Something invisible was never seen. Something forgettable was seen, acknowledged, and then dismissed. And dismissal is far more reliable than secrecy. Secrets can be uncovered. But something already explained, already filed away is unfortunate, already mourned and moved past, rarely gets a second look. This is the foundation of why ISI and RAW design outcomes that resemble accidents, not because accidents cannot be questioned, but because people stop questioning them once a reasonable answer exists. Think about how investigations actually work in the real world. When something happens, authorities look for an explanation that fits the evidence. They do not look for all possible explanations. They look for the most plausible one. And once they find it, the case closes. A man dies in a hotel room from a heart attack. An autopsy is performed. There is a history of hypertension. The coroner signs the report. The family receives the body. The story ends. But what if the heart attack came 3 days before he was scheduled to testify? What if his medication had been tampered with weeks earlier in a way that leaves no trace? The investigation still closes, because the explanation is medically sound. The evidence supports it, and no one wants to believe that the world works the way it actually does. This is how intelligence agencies shape reality without controlling it. They do not need to silence investigators or bribe officials. They simply need to provide a narrative that makes sense. And if the narrative aligns with what people already expect to see, it becomes the truth by default. This is not a failure of the system. This is the system working exactly as it was designed. Because the goal of law enforcement is to solve cases. And once a case is solved, resources move elsewhere. But the goal of intelligence work is not to create mysteries. It is to create closures that no one revisits. Now consider how time is used as a weapon in these operations. When something happens immediately after a threat is made, it looks suspicious. Cause and effect are too close together. People notice. But when something happens 6 months later, the connection blurs. When it happens a year later, the connection disappears. A journalist writes an article exposing corruption and a defense contract. Nothing happens to him. He continues his work. He writes more articles. Then, 18 months later, his car is hit by a truck at an intersection. The driver was texting. Witnesses confirm it. There is video footage. The journalist's earlier work is never mentioned in the investigation because why would it be? The accident has its own complete explanation. But that delay was not coincidence. It was strategy. Because time erodes suspicion. And suspicion is the only thing that keeps questions alive. Coincidence is another tool that works in favor of deniable operations. People understand that unlikely things happen. Statistics allow for randomness. A defector's brother dies in a house fire. The same week the defector is scheduled to give testimony. Tragic. But fires happen. A researcher working on sensitive technology loses his laptop in a robbery. Unfortunate, but crime exists. An activist's phone is hacked just before a major protest. Frustrating. But digital security is weak everywhere. Individually, each event is explainable. But when you step back and see them in sequence, a pattern emerges, except most people never step back. They see each event in isolation, and isolation is where truth goes to die. What makes this even more effective is that intelligence agencies do not need to control everything. They only need to nudge certain outcomes in certain directions. A bribe here, a planted piece of evidence there, a rumor introduced into the right conversation, a delayed response from emergency services. These are not massive conspiracies requiring hundreds of people to stay silent. They are small interventions at critical moments that shift probability just enough. to make something happen that might not have happened otherwise. And once it happens, it is no longer a question of if someone caused it. It is simply something that occurred. Because the event exists independently now, it has its own life, and the hand that nudged it is nowhere to be found. Intelligence agencies also understand that confusion is more valuable than secrecy. If you want to hide something, do not try to erase all evidence. Instead, bury it under so much conflicting information that no one knows what to believe. A whistleblower is found dead in his apartment. One forensic expert says suicide. Another says homicide. A third says the evidence is inconclusive. Conspiracy theories emerge. Some people believe he was killed by the government. Others believe it was a rival faction. Still others believe it was genuinely suicide, and the conspiracy theories are distractions. And in the chaos of competing narratives, the truth becomes irrelevant because people stop looking for the truth when they realize they will never agree on it. The most chilling aspect of all this is how often people actively choose to believe the accident narrative, even when they suspect something else. Because accepting that someone was killed requires accepting that the world is more dangerous than it appears. It requires accepting that powerful institutions act outside the law. It requires accepting that justice is sometimes an illusion. And most people do not want to live in that reality. So they accept the explanation that allows them to sleep at night. The brakes failed. The heart gave out. The timing was unfortunate. These are not lies people are tricked into believing. They are lies people choose to believe because the alternative is unbearable. And that is the real genius of operations designed to look like accidents. They do not just fool investigators. They fool everyone, including the people who suspect the truth. Because suspicion without proof is just paranoia. And no one wants to be the person who sees conspiracies everywhere. The line between what happened and what was made to happen is thinner than anyone admits. And it stays thin because no one wants to look closely enough to see where it actually is. Show more to 33 p.m. What most people do not realize is that by the time an accident occurs, the operation is already over. The accident is not the plan. It is the conclusion. The real work happened months or even years earlier, in ways so subtle that even the target did not notice. Intelligence agencies like ISI and RAW understand something fundamental about human behavior. You do not need to destroy someone directly. You only need to place them in conditions where they destroy themselves. And if you are patient enough, they will. This is where the concept of pressure becomes important. But not pressure in the way most people imagine it. There are no threats, no confrontations, no moments where someone realizes they are being targeted. Instead, there is a slow accumulation of small disruptions. A visa application that takes longer than usual. A bank transfer that gets delayed for unclear reasons. A contact who stops returning calls. A meeting that gets rescheduled 3 times and then quietly canceled. None of these things are dramatic. None of them are proof of anything. But together, over time, they create a world where everything becomes slightly harder than it should be. And when someone's life starts to require more effort than it did before, they begin to make mistakes. Consider how this works in practice. A journalist is investigating corruption and a defense deal. He has sources. He has documents. He is preparing to publish. But then his editor becomes cautious. Legal is concerned about libel. The publication's ownership has questions about timing. The story is delayed. Meanwhile, the journalist's personal life begins to fracture. His marriage is strained. His finances are tighter than usual. A freelance contract he was counting on falls through. None of these things are connected in any visible way. But each one creates stress, and stress creates distraction, and distraction creates errors. Eventually, the journalist misses a deadline, or publishes something that is not fully verified, or burns a source by being careless, and when that happens, his credibility suffers. Not because he was silenced, because he was exhausted. This is the invisible architecture of modern intelligence work. You do not need to touch the target. You only need to touch everything around them, their income, their relationships, their reputation, their sense of stability. And you do this not by attacking directly, but by creating friction. A loan application is rejected for technical reasons. A professional reference gives a lukewarm recommendation. A rumor circulates in the right circles that someone is difficult to work with. None of these actions are traceable back to an intelligence agency. They look like the ordinary dysfunction of the world. But the cumulative effect is that the target's life begins to collapse under its own weight. What makes this approach so effective is that the target never knows they are under attack. They believe they are experiencing bad luck, a rough patch, a series of unfortunate coincidences. And because they do not realize they are being pressured, they do not take defensive measures. They do not lawyer up. They do not go public. They do not protect themselves. Instead, they keep trying to fix problems that are being created faster than they can solve them. And eventually, the pressure becomes unbearable. That is when the accidents happen. Not because someone is forced into them, but because someone is drifting toward them and no longer has the clarity or resources to stop. Intelligence agencies also understand that silence is a weapon. When someone is waiting for an answer, waiting creates anxiety. When someone is expecting support, absence creates doubt. A defector who is promised protection, but then experiences delays in communication, begins to wonder if the promise was real. An informant who reports intelligence but receives no feedback begins to question whether the information was valued. And in that space of uncertainty, people make decisions they would not otherwise make. They reach out to the wrong person. They return to a place they should have left. They trust someone they should not. And those decisions, made under the weight of isolation and doubt, often lead to outcomes that look entirely self-inflicted. There is another layer to this that is rarely discussed. In many operations, the intelligence agency never issues an order to harm the target. There is no directive, no signed document, no recorded conversation. Instead, there is simply an understanding that a particular problem needs to go away. And once that understanding exists, certain people in certain positions begin to act in ways that make the problem disappear. A bureaucrat delays a permit. A banker flags a transaction. A landlord refuses to renew a lease. None of these people believe they are part of an intelligence operation. They believe they are doing their jobs, but their jobs have been shaped by information they received, or pressure they felt, or incentives they were given. And the result is that the target's world becomes unlivable without anyone committing a crime. This is the part that disturbs people the most when they begin to understand it. The agencies themselves often do nothing. They do not kill. They do not kidnap. They do not sabotage. They simply arrange circumstances so that someone else does, or so that the target does it to themselves. A man under financial pressure takes on debt he cannot repay. A woman under reputational attack makes a public statement that backfires. A defector under psychological strain returns to the country he fled. And when the inevitable happens, when the debt leads to ruin, when the statement destroys a career, when the return ends in imprisonment or worse, it looks like a personal failure, not an engineered outcome. The genius of this approach is that it requires almost no operational footprint. There are no assassins to recruit, no weapons to move, no surveillance teams to deploy, just information placed in the right hands, just pressure applied at the right moments, just patience. Because if you wait long enough, people will do the work for you. They will make the decisions that lead to their own undoing, and they will believe, until the very end, that they were simply unlucky. By the time something looks like an accident, the outcome was already inevitable. The intelligence agency did not cause the event. It caused the conditions that made the event unavoidable. And those conditions were set so far in advance that by the time anyone looks back, there is nothing to see. Just a person who made bad choices. Just a tragedy that could not have been prevented. Intervention was never the plan. Waiting was. What people misunderstand about intelligence operations is that they are not plans to create events. They are decisions about outcomes. And once the decision is made, The operation becomes a process of removing obstacles until the outcome arrives on its own. There is no moment where someone pulls a trigger or gives a final order. There is only a recognition that certain conditions have been met, and that what happens next is no longer a question of if, but when. By the time something looks like an accident, it is because every other possibility has been quietly erased. Not through force, through absence. This is why ISI and RAW invest so much in patience. Because patience is not waiting. Patience is control over time. It is the ability to let pressure accumulate without acting, to let a situation degrade without intervening, to watch someone make decisions that lead them closer to a predetermined end. And the reason this works so effectively is that people expect intelligence agencies to do something, to act, to strike. But the most dangerous operations are the ones where nothing is done, where the agency simply steps back and allows reality to collapse in the direction it was already leaning. A man under financial strain does not need to be pushed into bankruptcy. He only needs to be denied the relief that would have saved him. A defector does not need to be killed. He only needs to be isolated until he believes his only option is to return. The operation is not in the action. It is in the withholding of action. Consider what this means in practice. A target has been identified. A judgment has been made. But there is no arrest, no raid, no confrontation. Instead, there is a slow withdrawal of support. A contact stops answering calls. A safe house is no longer available. A promised payment does not arrive. And as these supports disappear, the target begins to improvise. He reaches out to people he should not trust. He takes risks he would not normally take. He makes himself visible in ways that create vulnerability. And then, when the accident happens, it happens because he placed himself in a position where accidents become likely. The intelligence agency did not cause the accident. It caused the conditions that made the accident inevitable. And once those conditions exist, the agency does nothing, because nothing is the final move. This is the logic that most people cannot accept. That power is often exercised through refusal, through silence, through the decision not to act. A journalist under pressure does not need to be threatened. He only needs to be ignored by the institutions that would have protected him. An informant under suspicion does not need to be exposed. He only needs to be abandoned by the people who promised him safety. And in that abandonment, people make the decisions that lead to their own end. Because when you are desperate, you do desperate things. And desperate things look like mistakes, not operations. Intelligence agencies also understand that closure is more powerful than truth. People do not want to live in a world where every tragedy is a conspiracy. They want explanations that allow them to move forward. A car accident is tragic, but it is comprehensible. A heart attack is devastating, but it is natural. A suicide is painful, but it is a choice someone made. And once these explanations are accepted, they are rarely revisited. Because reopening a closed case requires admitting that the first conclusion was wrong. And institutions do not like to admit they were wrong. Families do not like to admit they were deceived. And so the accident remains an accident, not because it was, but because believing otherwise requires too much. What makes this even more effective is that the agencies themselves often never confirm or deny anything. There is no statement, no leak. No internal acknowledgement that an operation occurred. Because if the operation succeeded, there is nothing to acknowledge. The target is gone. The problem is resolved. And the method was clean enough that no evidence exists linking the outcome to a decision. This is the standard by which success is measured in covert work. Not whether something was done, but whether it can be proven that something was done. And if it cannot be proven, then operationally, it did not happen, even if everyone involved knows that it did. The reason most people never recognize this system is because it operates in the gaps between cause and effect. It exploits the space where correlation does not imply causation, where timing can be coincidence, where opportunity can be randomness. And because people are trained to be skeptical of conspiracy, they dismiss patterns that do not have proof. They mock the idea that powerful institutions would act in coordinated ways without leaving traces. But that skepticism is not a defense against manipulation. It is part of the system. Because as long as people demand absolute proof before they believe something, outcomes that are designed to lack proof will always be accepted as accidents. There is one final piece to this that ties everything together. The most successful operations are not the ones that eliminate threats. They are the ones that make elimination unnecessary. A person who is discredited does not need to be silenced. A person who is isolated does not need to be monitored. A person who has lost credibility, resources, and support is no longer a threat even if they are still alive. And so the operation ends not with a death, but with irrelevance. The target continues to speak, but no one listens. They continue to act, but no one cares. And in that state, they are more useful as a cautionary tale than they ever were as a problem, because their failure becomes a warning to others. Do not ask the wrong questions. Do not challenge the wrong people. Do not assume you are untouchable. This is the world intelligence agencies have built, not through violence, but through patience, not through secrecy, but through plausible deniability, not through action, but through the careful withholding of it. And the reason this world persists is because most people do not want to see it. They want to believe that accidents are accidents, that tragedies are tragedies, that the world is chaotic but not controlled. And as long as people want to believe that, the system will continue to work exactly as it was designed. Because the most successful operation is the one you never realize happened. And by the time you suspect it did, it is far too late to prove otherwise. You are left only with a feeling, a quiet unease, a sense that something was wrong, but no way to say what. And that feeling, that unease, is not paranoia. It is recognition. The recognition that the line between accident and intention was never as clear as you wanted it to be, and that most of the time, when something terrible happens, and the explanation feels just reasonable enough to accept, someone, somewhere, knew exactly how it would end before it even began.